Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of TRC Podcast, a monthly podcast where we deep dive into the greats of the past. I'm one of your hosts, Tristan Jung. As always, I'm joined by Albert Corsten.
Hi!
And Alex Nestor.
Yo!
And today we're looking at probably one of the greatest games of all time. Pokemon Red and Blue.
Or green.
Or green. Or yellow. They just throw out all the primary colors out there.
It's true.
Yeah, so released first in February 27th, 1996 in Japan, Pokemon Green and Red was it was the first game in the Pokemon series, developed by Game Freak and published by Nintendo. It's a third-person view, overhead perspective RPG, where you play a Pokemon trainer in the land of Kanto, and you're on the quest to become the Pokemon Master, right? That's what they call it?
Pokemon Champion.
Kanto region, not the
Kanto
land.
region, sorry.
Not the land. It's actually because, in Japan, Tokyo is located in the Kanto Plain. It's the geographic region, so it's supposed to take homage from that. And
how you get to this goal is building up your team, capturing Pokemon from the wild, beating gym leaders.
Gotta make a name for yourself, right?
Yeah. And then eventually beating the Elite Four. So that's kind of the high level.
And all doing this while you're like a 12-year-old kid.
Yeah, they just set them off on this adventure. I never understood that.
Goodbye, son. Enjoy the world.
Good luck.
Good luck.
They're just criminals out there, and yeah, they just send them out. Who cares?
Yeah. Gotta battle thugs on your way.
Mm-hmm. Stop a criminal organization, no big deal.
Yeah, exactly.
What was your first exposure to Pokemon Red and Blue?
So I have a bit of an interesting experience with how I actually got Pokemon and how I played my first Pokemon game. So my friend at the time, I basically coerced into giving me his yellow cartridge because he had a Game Boy Color and he had gold and silver. So, I just used my Jedi Persuasion on him and eventually just handed it over for free. It was about the greatest experience I ever had. It was a natural roll of 20. So yeah, yellow version was overall my first experience into the genre, which was potentially a bad thing knowing how the early game of yellow goes, so. But enough of that. What about you, Albert?
I am an OG, so my first experience was on a Game Boy, blue version, popping it in when I was, I want to say 6 years old is when I first played blue version. I'm going to be completely honest, I don't remember exactly how I remember as a child, but seeing as though I stuck with it and bought most of the other games as a child, I assumed I liked it a lot, and I still like the series now, so it gave a good first impression and a legendary start to the series in general and sort of the worldwide phenomenon that it would become over time.
Yeah, and as for me, I also played the blue version. I think my only memories was playing it in the car and always pressing all the buttons down when I'm trying to capture a Pokemon. Everything else is kind of fuzzy to me. Don't remember that much. But yeah, Pokemon Red and Green and Blue and Yellow, the original Pokemon RPG released on the Game Boy. It's quite the all-star cast that worked on this. I have the full list here, and basically every person that has worked on this is like either a CEO or like some supervisor or, president. So it was directed by Satoshi Tajiri, who's directed Gold, Silver, Ruby, Sapphire, and executive director of literally every other Pokemon game afterwards. Have you guys heard of Shigeru Miyamoto?
I'm a little fuzzy on that one. Could you explain?
My boy Shiggy.
Yeah. Shigeru Miyamoto was one of the producers. I don't need to go too much. He's invented a lot of Nintendo franchises, along with Takashi Kawaguchi, who is the supervisor of the anime and kind of the marketing side, and God, I'm going to butcher this one. Tsunekazu Ishihara, who is currently the CEO of the Pokemon Company. So, back then they started off pretty small. They all work together. It's kind of like the all-star dream team, if you think about it now.
It's pretty true, yeah. Of their team, really only Iwata was not one of the major names of this project, right?
Yeah, Iwata joined in during Gold and Silver, which we'll, I guess, do eventually.
Well, we got it. That's actually the best Pokemon series. Just telling you.
But yeah, even back then, this is a pretty scary team, and obviously they were able to kind of pull the rabbit out of the hat and create one of the biggest franchises in history. So I guess going into the high levels, a lot of people kind of think of Pokemon Red, Blue, and Green to be very detailed, at least for its time. There were a lot of unique designs. I don't think any other game had this many quote-unquote characters. There were a lot of great sound choices and gameplay features. What do you think is the one thing they did that was really ahead of its time?
The major thing is just the incredible amount of freedom it allowed you compared to a lot of the other RPG games of the time. Like, there were, 150 Pokemon in the game, and then from those 150, they all had these unique movesets, so by the time you're at the end of the game, your Pokemon could look completely different from your friends, even if it was the same Pokemon. So that was just crazy what you could do.
I think for me, as a kid, it was the training and kind of building a Pokemon team, and not even just a team, but capturing different ones. There was definitely a big trend towards, like, kids and digital pets back during the 90s. A big example is like Tamagotchi. So this was kind of the next level forward of that, where you could not only just have something you have to like feed, you could battle other Pokemon and level them up and sort of treat them as a pet that you owned, and that you could name them. And I think as a kid it was just a lot of fun to be able to have that freedom.
Yeah, and of course they just had moves like Hyper Beam. How could you not be excited about a name like that as a kid?
Yeah, and as for me, I played this game after the anime came out, and you know how obsessed I am with, like, Pikachu and all I guess, Pokemon in general. I think having the ability to capture them and kind of, like, have them on your team, just kind of unlock the magic, and I'm assuming it did for many other folks as well. So having kind of that kind of crossover between what you watch on TV and what you're able to actually interact with, I think that was a very big thing that the game actually did pretty well. I know there were like other movie games before, but this was probably the most interactive it got out of all the mediums.
Yeah, and adding on to that part about like capturing them and leveling them up, like you said, there's a social aspect of it as well, where everyone at the time was caught in this Pokemon phenomenon, where I could go up to you, Tristan, and be like, dude, look at my level 62 Charizard. He totally beat the crap out of your little Diglett. And you'd be like, man, you're right. I got to train my Diglett up. He's got to be a Doug Trio, and we're going to battle. So I think the social aspect was something that is unheard of nowadays, almost, in terms of how crazy of a phenomenon Pokemon became during the 90s. There was those articles where schools were banning Pokemon cards and the game because it was distracting the kids too much, which has never happened again, I think, past that point.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think part of it is the lack of easily accessible internet and smartphones back in that age. So Pokemon was kind of like the one common thing everyone really liked, or at least most people liked. And it was really weird to see everyone talk about it, trading. Our school actually did ban Pokemon cards, you're right. I think it's the general kind of feeling of friendship that it brought that was pretty special.
Yeah.
Yeah, because for kids at that time, games didn't really have you interacting with other people. The internet kind of online gaming wasn't a thing yet. So being able to link battle with people was just kind of this whole new field, especially for an RPG. That was kind of unheard of for RPGs at the time, to be able to have any sort of multiplayer aspect to them.
The main formula we kind of went over, kind of like this capture, defeat, gather batch cycle, and it really hasn't changed in the past 20 years. You know, we've had, I think, 8 or 9 mainline games so far, and it's always the same thing. What do you think about it is the thing that makes it so addicting? Like, they are not willing to change, but at the same time, all the players are willing to play this over and over again.
Well, I think the big thing is, although the generations do basically have the same gameplay premise, they do change up a lot of the gameplay mechanics and systems. Like Gen 2 added a lot of extra mechanics, like the just steel types, dark types, things like that, to kind of change up the meta, make Alakazam a little less overpowered. And then obviously just kind of continues on. Gen 4 had physical and special attacks, split for types. So I think that was a huge thing, is just, while it is the same thing, we end up seeing some evolution that's kind of a little more nuanced than, I guess, big overhauls of the system.
Yeah, I definitely think also nostalgia plays a big factor into why the series is so well played still. It's definitely, I mean, if it was horrible to play, obviously nostalgia wouldn't matter if no one's having fun playing it. But like Alex said, it's generally the core gameplay of being sort of a JRPG in which you go around and build your party and collect all the Pokemon if you want. It's still mostly fun, so nostalgia has us continually buying it and kind of chasing after those feelings we had as kids. And it's still fun. And then there's that social aspect, which never really went away, where you trade Pokemon with your friends and you talk to your friends about, oh, what Pokemon are you using in your party and all that jazz.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, at least for me, it's definitely the nostalgia that makes it addicting, and the social factor. A bunch of us play at work, and whenever a new game comes out, we basically talk about what type of team we're building. It's kind of, I mean, thinking about it from an external point of view, it sounds really weird, but it's really still really fun. As for the gameplay itself, I think, to me, it's kind of like the ability to try something new every time. I tend not to play the game more than once, but I definitely try to mix it up every time I buy a new game. So sometimes, I go like some dumb normal type only team, or sometimes I only capture Pikachus.
That sounds like suicide, a normal type only team.
Yeah, things like that. So I think just kind of the replayability factor is built into the fact that the core stays the same, and kind of the environment and the Pokemon changes, so you have a lot of replayability built in.
Is it just me? This is a random aside, but we were talking about how going back for nostalgia a lot. Mm-hmm. So there was, for me personally, I played Gen 1, like Red, Blue. I played Gen 2, Gold, Silver. But after that, I kind of took a hiatus from Pokemon games up until Black and White. So a pretty big one. I missed like Crystal and all those versions in between. But there was just that amazing feeling after coming back to Pokemon after 5 or 6 years and buying a game and popping it in and naming your trainer at the start of a game. That's just, it felt so good to do that. And I don't know, have you guys taken big breaks from the Pokemon series and come back, and when you pop that game cartridge in, it just feels like you're a kid again?
I never took a big break. I didn't buy Black and White or any of the Gen 5 games, but I came back for Gen 6, and I think Gen 6 was probably one of the more nostalgic ones, because of course they made Mega Pokemon, and a lot of the old Pokemon got Mega Stones, so they got to be super cool and kind of the forefront of the game again. So I think that was probably a special time to get back into the game.
Yeah, it was similar to me too. I think I stopped after Diamond, and then I picked it back up when they remade Ruby and Sapphire. And since I already played Ruby and Sapphire back in the day, it was pretty nostalgic. It was like really fun to go through all this stuff again, and then they added a lot more things afterwards, so that was really refreshing. But yeah, that was my experience. I don't even know what your question was.
Did we feel like kids again?
Oh, did you? Yes.
Feel like a kid.
Yes, I felt like a kid again.
You're like a robot. Yes. What was the question? Oh, yes.
Oh, yes. I agree, Albert.
I agree. Next question.
No, I think it's definitely like listening to the remastered music, right?
Oh, dude.
Seeing all the upgraded graphics, seeing Kyogre and, Groudon. Just like all the cutscenes, right? They added so many cutscenes. That brought me back, and that was really exciting.
Yeah, like for Sun and Moon, when they brought back Red and Blue, when you fight them when you get to the World Tree, oh my god, they remixed the music from the original game, and it gave me goosebumps, man.
So there's been a lot of interviews, with the developers explaining that the game really prides itself for focusing on gameplay rather than visuals. Although visuals relative to that time, I think it was okay. And some research from The Guardian even said that the lack of artificial effects promoted child's imaginations and creativity. Do you think that was the case with this game?
Yeah, and I'm going to point to the specific example of a Pokemon battle in that you do an attack, and some of the attacks back in Red and Blue would have little animations or whatever, like Razor Leaf would have little leaves go across the screen. But I mean, like, stuff like Tackle and Headbutt, your Pokemon would just move forward a couple frames and then back really fast. So in your mind as a kid, you're imagining, like, your Nidoran doing something, like, awesome. And along with just the battle effects, the pixel sprites in the original Pokemon games were really bad. So...
some of the back sprites.
Exactly.
Like Blastoise, I can never unforget that.
Yeah, so when they're in a battle and you see the actual pictures of what the Pokemon look like from either like books or from the TV show or from the trading card game, your mind is not picturing that pixel art thing. Well, I mean, maybe it could, but your brain is replacing that with actual pictures of the Pokemon you've seen and imagining and being like, oh, this epic duel's going on. Oh, he's using Hyper Beam. Oh my god. So as a kid, when I was in these battles, I was thinking like, oh, I want to be a Pokemon master in real life. I want to throw Pokeballs around and catch Pokemon. And Pokemon Go, I think the reason why it got big was because it kind of fulfilled that fantasy a little that everyone probably had as a kid.
I don't know, I guess I didn't see it quite the same way, where you're imagining the book or illustration sprites being the actual monster. Because, for example, the yellow version Golbat, I can never forget that sprite. Oh my god, does he look just crazy. But, I don't know, I enjoy the game sprites for what they are. They're just kind of really silly looking, and you just get past it pretty quick.
I mean, I would say, though, as a kid, you don't really even notice that the sprites are bad.
Yeah, typically you just accepted it because there wasn't anything better, really.
That's true.
At that time, you had nothing to compare it to, really,
exactly.
other
Back
than
then,
the illustration.
It's not like there were games with higher definition models at all. So
yeah, so, I don't know. I thought the graphics were basically at par with other Game Boy games of the time. So it just didn't really strike me as a weird thing that it was so limited.
Yeah, I think the one thing I'll agree with Albert on are the actual attacks, like things like Swift and Water Gun. You see them in the anime, and I've always like imagined them kind of playing out as well. And as the generations went on and the animations got better and better, I think that was really cool to see. But even as a kid, imagining some of these attacks, I think was the biggest part, at least for me.
Yeah, like huge attacks like Solar Beam and Hydro Pump with the giant waterfalls of water.
That's right. Yeah.
And like fly. And
Yeah.
like they disappear and you're just imagining them they're about to eagle dive on the enemies and stuff. All right, so we were talking about this a little bit before the recording. I guess in the world of JRPGs, how is this game able to define itself? Is this a JRPG? Is this not a JRPG?
Oh, it's most definitely a JRPG. It's just a little bit of a different flavor that, especially for its time, is really unique. The main thing is that, I think we touched upon this earlier, your party members, so to speak, aren't really defined for you. As you go through the story, the Pokemon that you have don't really matter in terms of which Pokemon they are. So you could ultimately have complete freedom over what your team actually ends up being. Of course, restricted by whatever version you're playing, but yeah, so that was just the major thing is while you had a very fluid party, it was still very much following all the JRPG tropes. You were this boy going on a great journey across the land, defeating all these people, defeating crime syndicates, and becoming the ultimate champion of the land. So, yeah, it's very much a JRPG through and through.
Now that I think about it, I agree with Alex that it's definitely borrowing a lot of JRPG mechanics and can definitely be classified as a JRPG. But when I think about it, in terms of a games holistically, when I say, what is Pokemon? I don't say, oh, that's a JRPG. I don't immediately associate that in my brain. I don't know if that's just me, but I almost feel like Pokemon is its own genre in its own, just because there have been no other game franchises that have attempted to replicate what it's doing to a successful rate, that it's sort of stood apart on its own in the game ecosystem, that I don't feel that it's right to classify it just directly as a JRPG. But I definitely agree it takes a lot of JRPG mechanics, and you could, if you were to create like hierarchies and if you wanted to create like ontological diagrams, you could put it into a JRPG category.
Mm-hmm. I guess where I'm coming from is later on there were games like Shin Megami Tensei, Digimon, things like that came out that play very much like a Pokemon game, but I guess that's how I'm seeing it.
Oh man, I feel like Pokemon is like the baby version of SMT, now that I think about it. But thinking back and kind of comparing it to JRPGs around that time, I would definitely, I agree with Alex, it's definitely in the same realm, but I also agree with Albert in saying that when I try to explain a game that's similar to Pokemon, I just say, oh, it's like a Pokemon game.
Sure, yeah, because it's so widely known, the Pokemon, of what you're expecting from a gameplay perspective when you say Pokemon. No one's going to be like, oh yeah, Shin Megami Tensei, I know all about that game.
That's true, but I think what Tristan is trying to say is that he wouldn't describe a game as, oh, it's like a normal JRPG.
Sure, yeah.
Versus, oh, it's a Pokemon game. But I guess you could say that's more probably dependent on mechanics.
Even SMT, I would say it's like a Pokemon game.
Rather than, oh, it's like a JRPG?
very, very hard Pokemon game.
No, I think that's a fair enough thing to use to explain a game like SMT. Yeah. Because, like I said, Pokemon's just so generally known that I think everyone will understand what you're trying to say when you say, oh, it's a Pokemon game.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right, cool. Let's jump into development. So this game actually took 6 years to make, which is, considering it was still the 90s, that's an insanely long time.
Yeah, I was gonna say, holy moly, 6 years for a game in the 90s? That's way longer than just a console generation in the 90s and the 80s.
I think even games nowadays rarely take 6 years.
Oh yeah, 6 years even now is like Rockstar level GTA games, Zelda games, maybe Elder Scrolls games. That's about the only ones I can think on the top of my head.
Yeah, and you start worrying when they get up to that long of a development cycle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
for most franchises.
Yeah, I'm surprised Nintendo didn't just cut this, considering it was a new IP at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I read an article that said that Game Freak almost went bankrupt making this game, and that if it failed, they would have definitely went out of business because they just spent pretty much all their money developing this one game. Or 2 games, I guess. Red and Blue. Or Green.
4 games? Question mark.
Well, I mean, those ones came out later. I mean, I guess I was thinking from the original Japanese releases when these games first came out. These 2 games.
Yeah, it was, I mean, they had a long time to work on it. I guess they optimized it as much as they could, so they wrote it in assembly. Screw high-level languages, let's just write it in assembly. They had less than 2 megabytes to work with. I don't know if that's the cartridge size. Oh, yeah, I'm assuming that's the cartridge size, right?
I would assume so.
Yeah, and they were somehow able to fit the entire game, like all the sprites, all the Pokemon cries, the maps, everything, music, in 375 kilobytes. That's less than an MP3.
Mm-hmm. I need that kind of compression right there.
There are like some pictures that we take on our smartphones nowadays that are easily above 1 megabyte in size.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's pretty incredible. No wonder like all the people that worked on this game eventually became like super high up, because they probably worked in the most constrained situation possible.
And I think that it sort of points to Nintendo's sort of overall development philosophy as well, where you don't need the flashiest graphics, you don't need the strongest hardware. What makes a game fun is the mechanics itself.
Yeah, definitely. Actually, going off of fun, I'm just gonna skip around the questions a little bit. The game was actually based on Satoshi Tajiri's hobby, which was buck collecting.
Buck?
Buck.
What's a buck?
Bug.
Oh, bug.
Collect.
I heard buck. Did you hear buck too, Alex?
I don't know what I heard, but it wasn't bug.
I heard buck.
Bug collecting. And, I mean, this is pretty typical of Nintendo games, right? They base games off of producer and director's hobbies, childhood hobbies. How do you think this kind of affects Nintendo's games compared to other developers?
Yeah, I think just to preface, who was the Tajiri, correct?
Yep.
Yeah, so I read in that same article that I referenced earlier that Tajiri, when he first pitched this idea to Nintendo, it got rejected. But when he teamed up with Miyamoto, he's kind of that guy who went for those childhood adventures which influence game design. So when they pitched with him, he's the one who approved it. So I think that just from a game philosophy design standpoint that Miyamoto had, he thinks that experiences as obviously as a kid with games marketed for kids would sell better and would be more fun and relatable.
I'm trying to think of other games in that era that did really well. That is not from Japan.
It's not from Japan.
Yeah.
In 96?
Oh, dude. The only
Half-Life?
Yeah, back in my day when I was stopping the alien invasion.
Do you think Half-Life was based on a childhood experience?
Oh, definitely.
Gabe Newell's childhood was very complicated, Tristan.
All right, cool. Yeah, you mentioned Miyamoto. Miyamoto obviously had a big influence on how this game was built, developed, marketed even. He was actually the one that suggested that they split the game into two. I believe initially they just put everything on one cartridge, like all 151 Pokemon.
Yes.
And Miyamoto was like, hey, let's split into two with exclusive Pokemon on each side to encourage trading. And I would have imagined there's a lot of pushback. It worked out. Is it still a good idea? Is Pokemon the only game that can do this? Do you think other games will be able to pull this off?
Nowadays, I don't think the multi-version thing really makes sense anymore, especially since there's like the Global Trade Center and things like that, so you can just get all the version Pokemon without having to actually physically meet anyone. But that's kind of not here or there, but, in the past, it would definitely be a gamble, but of course it works out monetarily if you're getting people to potentially buy two versions of the same game. And it's just basically switches around which Pokemon they end up being able to catch.
Is that if they have no friends, they have to buy both versions?
Wait, did anyone here buy both versions?
I have blue and yellow, but that's it.
Yeah, I only had yellow, so I'm not one of those guys, but...
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, my sister and I used to get different versions. Does that...
Sure, yeah.
Doesn't count, right?
Yeah, my brother would get the other version from Gold onwards, so we'd be able to trade, but... So I guess, yeah, it worked out. I guess it does encourage trading, because, yeah, you'd want to catch... The whole tagline of the series is collect them all, or at least it was.
Catch them all.
Yeah, I don't know if they still use that catch line, but...
Oh, they do. They do, I
think. They do? Okay.
Yeah. It's like on their, like, plushies and stuff. The branding is like gotta catch them all.
Okay. But yeah, that was ultimately the true end game of Pokemon, was to collect them all. So this two version strategy encouraged trading. I definitely think it did.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was a risky gamble that paid off. For me personally, just going off of my experiences, as a kid I wasn't too inclined on the gotta catch 'em all thing. I wasn't that good at the game as a kid. I didn't know too much about exactly which moves are super effective against which types and blah blah blah. So I just played it to kind of collect, kind of build my current party of Pokemon and just kind of beat the game. But I feel that a lot of kids back then were very determined to get every single Pokemon, and knowing someone with a different version sort of made you popular potentially in a group of friends, where if 5 of your friends want the blue version and you're the only one with the red version, then everyone wants to trade with you to get the unique Pokemon.
Right, and they even kind of went further with that, in that there were Pokemon where you had to trade them in order to evolve them to their final form.
Exactly.
Like Machoke and Haunter. So there was a large incentive to actually trade with other human beings.
Yeah, I think Miyamoto kind of had really good forward thinking with the whole social aspect. You can see it again when they had the Street Pass games on the DS. Like, Nintendo has this very strong emphasis on socializing with other folks, not just talking, but like, trading, making these like exclusive things that are only possible through trading. And I think it was definitely a good idea. I got to talk to my sister a lot more, right?
How Pokemon saved my relationship with my sister by Tristan Jung.
You saved my family, Miyamoto. And definitely, I agree with you. Back then, it was only 151. It's like plausible to finish your Pokedex compared to now. So there was this like competitive spirit, and the biggest thing I remember are getting the starter Pokemons. Like, could you breed back then?
No. Breeding was a start in Gold and Silver.
Yeah,
so you couldn't breed, so you had to have a friend who was willing to like start their game over and over again for the group. And
unless you were playing Yellow version, in which you could get all three.
In the wild, right?
Nope.
Just one, right?
It was through NPC events, and
okay.
you'd get one of each.
What do you guys feel about the double versions nowadays? I feel like that...
No, we gotta stop. Alright, guys, which starter did you guys choose?
God, I got scared.
Yeah, I got really scared too. I picked Squirtle.
Squirtle? Alright.
I'm a Bulbasaur, man.
Oh, God.
One of the black lambs of the group.
Alex, are you a Charmander?
I played yellow version, so I had all three. Get at me.
Who's your favorite then, huh?
My favorite of that period? Definitely Squirtle. No.
Yeah, Squirtle Squad.
Alright, so what do you guys feel about the double versions continuing into the current era of Pokemon? Personally, I feel that they just can't break away from it. It's sort of their staple now that they're kind of stuck to it. But only speaking from Sun and Moon, because that's the only one I realized that has differences. There is one major difference between the versions, and that's in Moon, during certain hours of the day, when it's daytime. In Sun, it's nighttime, and obviously the opposite. So I think it depends on the version of the game you get, how much daylight versus night you'll be seeing in your game.
First, it still retains, like, the social factor. Like, me and my friends at work argue about which version is cooler, still.
Well, yeah, you got to compare version exclusives. The legendaries.
Yeah, not only that, I think that nowadays with your friends, you're even like, all right, who's buying this version? Because if we need to make sure we at least have one person in our group who has each game, one of each game.
Yeah, and that's what happened. Like, I really didn't want to get Diamond. My sister wants to play Pearl, and I also want to play Pearl. And, you know, it's like, you know, somebody's got to bite the bullet and go with the less cool one. So I think that's still retained. I would assume that's the same thing with children as well. And I think they just kind of amped up the exclusive parts, right? They made stories branch depending on which version you have. There's a lot of, like, cool different changes that they added in that are not just exclusive Pokemon. So I think they've kind of evolved the two version thing to keep up with what they need to do to keep it still interesting.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, that's fair enough, but yeah, I guess they've kind of moved away from the third version kind of deal. They've been going around just kind of skipping it, doing a spin-off game in terms of Sun and Moon 2. What are they even called? I forget.
Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon.
Oh, Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. Okay. But yeah, like Black and White 2 were basically same continent, but different story and different gameplay. Some added features as well. So I think that's kind of a better strategy than their third version strategy, and I think they realized that after like Emerald version and Platinum version came out that they need to kind of change it up a little more. But yeah, I think the exclusivity part is still pretty good to have, I think, and of course from a marketing perspective, I am sure Nintendo loves it to have two versions of the game.
Speaking of versions, let's kind of quickly go over the versions since we keep naming 4 colors in case viewers or listeners don't know. So Green and Red were the original 2 releases in Japan. Pokemon came out in the US and Canada or North America 2 years afterwards. It came pretty late. And during that time, Blue was also released in Japan. It was kind of a special edition with a lot of fixes. So instead of bringing kind of the older broken version, they skipped forward and brought Red and Blue to North America. And then Yellow was released much afterwards to kind of mimic the anime craze that was going on in the US. That's why you have like the Pikachu following around. And I guess like Ash, you get all the starters.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I mentioned that it took a long time to bring it over to stateside, and most of this was actually due to the localization process. They found out that they couldn't just change the names because it broke all the code.
One of the pitfalls of assembly.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think games during this era, even I know stories about like Final Fantasy VI, where translations were kind of the biggest bottleneck of bringing games over. It's really fun to think about it now because nowadays they're able to release games like globally at the same time, right?
Yeah, I think there are probably listeners out there still waiting for Mother 3 to come out.
Oh man. You just triggered the whole audience.
Yep.
But yeah, it's interesting to see how this problem went away eventually. Because I do remember having to wait for games to come over here.
Cough, cough, Valkyria Chronicles 4. Cough, cough.
Well, yeah, that's a recent example. But even like in the PS3 era, it was really commonplace to see Japanese games come out like a year after in North America and other regions.
What if they announce and release Kingdom Hearts 3 in Japan and like NA versions like 2020?
Okay.
Oh, there will be riots and blood.
People will attack Square Enix's headquarters.
Nomura may have to go into witness protection.
Yeah, he will. Mm-hmm. He will have to go undercover.
All right. And the secondary part, other than localization, was Nintendo was actually very afraid to bring this game over here. They thought it was too cute. They thought they needed to make the characters a little edgy, right? This was right after Sonic, I assume, when being edgy and hip and what else are adjectives for Sonic? Cool, yeah, is the top thing. And Nintendo still has this, issue to this day, right? There's all these memes about American Kirby being really angry and violent.
Mm-hmm.
What are your guys' thoughts on marketing changes between multiple regions?
Yeah, that's just been a huge issue for Japan, and recently it's ebbed away a lot. They've kind of realized, hey, people actually like it when it's a really Japanese-styled game. But during, the last gen, they really struggled with, I guess, appealing to Western audiences. They tried to Westernize their games. And it just really didn't work out in almost every case, like Devil May Cry and games like that. So I don't know. It's just a weird stigma they've got where they just don't think it will appeal to a global audience for whatever reason, just because it's too cute or something.
There was the 151st Pokemon, Mew, right? Mm-hmm. And it was not in the game, per se. There were a lot of myths and rumors. This is before, the internet, right? Do you remember any good urban legends that were associated with Mew at that time? What did the kids on your playground say?
Mew is just under the truck. You gotta get under that truck.
And then there was the cruise ship rumor where you gotta search in a certain garbage can on the SS Anne.
Yep, and it would trigger the whole event. Kick it all off. That was the huge one.
Or, like, beat the game with, like, all level 100s. I think that was the one my friends used to say. Like, you have to capture these 6 specific Pokemon, grind them up to a level 100, and beat the Elite Four, and then you can get Mew.
Yeah, and there were certain events in Japan that gave... It was sort of a raffle or competition or contest of sorts where the game developers actually did give out, I think it was 100 copies of Mew.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to bring up not just Mew, but another one of probably the most notorious gaming myths and legends of all time, Missing No, and how he spawned as sort of this mysterious Pokemon that was a glitched Pokemon and shouldn't exist, and the rumors that, I don't know what kids on your guys' playground said, but mine were saying, like, oh, it was a mutated, failed Pokemon that made it into the game somehow. And so what did you guys get caught onto the Missing No hype train? Did you guys ever catch a Missing No? I remember I caught one.
There was never really any hype or myths or lore that we created about Missing No. We just knew it as the giver of infinite rare candies. I did end up catching a Missing No at one point, and I think it evolved into a Kangaskhan, which could learn Fly for some reason. So it's pretty awesome. I mean, but yeah, it was a wonderful glitch. I'm glad it was in the game, and yeah, it's one of probably the premier glitches of the game.
See, Alex, this is where we talked about the imagination. Imagine a Kangaskhan flying.
Yeah, you just gotta imagine it could fly. Although, one of my big memories is in Pokemon Stadium, Golem could learn Metronome, and Metronome would sometimes proc Fly, so Golem would just levitate in the air, and then he'd have a unique animation to actually come out of the air.
Oh, God.
Just turn into a rock and fall down.
It was calculated. It was all planned.
Iwata's attention to detail for Stadium. Reprogrammed it himself.
I was always spooked about these urban legends. Like Missing No and all these different things. I was kind of scared. I don't think anyone on my playground had it. We were always doing other stuff. So I didn't have too much exposure to it.
Well, there were always things said that it could mess up your game. I'm not sure it actually could. It probably can, just due to the nature of it.
It messed up one of my old save files. It corrupted the save, so I had to restart.
So yeah, I think that was a big thing, is people were just kind of scared of it at the same time because they didn't want to lose all their progress, all the time they put into a file. But yeah, this is...
Another huge one in terms of just urban legends and myths was the Lavender Town, and sort of the spooky, ominous music and what actually happened in the town, and why it was associated with ghost Pokemon. And then I think it was called the Lavender Town Syndrome, where there was a rumor that kids were killing themselves based on spending too much time in the town and listening to the music. Have you ever heard of this, Tristan? It looks like Alex has.
I heard of this recently. This is it's on Snopes.com, right?
I mean, you probably find it on there, but yeah.
Yeah, it was a huge thing. I think in Japan only it was a thing where they were saying, like, kids were having more thoughts of suicide after hearing this theme for so long. I think they pitch-tuned it or something for the US versions or maybe later versions of the game that came out. Mm-hmm. But, yeah.
I recall hearing that, too.
It's a very weird phenomenon.
Oh, wait, so it's real?
Yeah.
Oh, that's so spooky.
Yeah, there were plenty of articles about it.
Oh, that's so scary.
Mm-hmm.
See, now we're talking about it. See, this is...
no.
Imagine kids in elementary school talking about this. Like, oh, did you hear that if you go to Lavender Town and you spend too much time, you go crazy? And all your friends are like, what? No way.
I think I mentioned this near the beginning. What was your go-to method to ensure you catch a Pokemon? For me, I just pressed down everything.
I held down B as hard as I ever could. It would hurt my finger after a while.
Yep, I did the same one. Just hold down that button as hard as you can, and you're watching that Pokemon roll. Stressful. Top 10 stressful gaming moments. Throwing that Pokeball at a legendary Pokemon, just hoping, please catch it. Please catch it. This is my 10th Ultra Ball.
Oh man, I could never afford Ultra Balls as a kid. I would always be a great ball master.
It's gotta farm the Elite Four.
It just never felt like Ultra Balls were doing any better, so I would just always buy Great Balls. They were half the price.
Maybe that's another rumor that Alex had with his urban legend, legend as a kid, where they're like, guys, it's the big Nintendo. It's a fake. Ultra Balls are a fake. Great Balls are actually better. Wake up, sheeple. Wake up, sheeple.
That was an Alex perpetuated myth, and I think it might actually be true in some cases, depending on the monster's HP, but...
Alright, open up the Bulbapedia. Let's get the formulas out.
Yeah,
let's break down the assembly code, guys.
Let's do some quick math right now.
Alright, and I think this kind of segues us nicely into the legacy of the game. We've talked about hobbies. Another unique point is that Pokemon games don't have violence. There's no death. No, that's a lie. There's sometimes death.
Mm-hmm.
There is.
There are ghost moms.
Yeah, how do they become a ghost?
Mm-hmm.
They're like when your Pokemon's quote unquote die in battle, they fainted. And you just take them to the what do you call it?
Center.
Pokemon Center. And they revive them somehow.
And then if you get beat up, you just get blacked out and they take your money.
Yes. A nice mugging.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, they did this explicitly. They said they didn't want to fill the gaming world with pointless violence. Do you think this has affected the game at all?
I don't know, man. Some of my Pokemon are exploding. I think there might be a little bit more than a fainting going on.
Looking at you, Voltorb.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, do you think you want to see an M-rated Pokemon game?
No, I don't think it would serve a purpose to have death be a main point to having the game. I wouldn't change anything. It'd just be kind of gratuitous. So I think they made the right decision in making it just kind of a fainting spell or something when they get tired from getting beat up too much.
I agree, and there are people not necessarily just trying to put violence in the game. I guess it more stems from a challenge aspect, but there are some challenge playthroughs where players will tell themselves when a Pokemon faints, you treat it as quote-unquote dead, and you have to release it.
Right, yeah, the Nuzlocke challenges that people run, typically they'll go to a route, catch the first Pokemon they meet, and then, yeah, it's a permadeath if it faints in battle.
Mm-hmm. But I don't think that's necessarily them trying to instill death, more of just trying to make the game more challenging for themselves.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, cool. And if we talk about Pokemon, we have to bring this up. We have to bring up Twitch Plays Pokemon, the legendary streamed community global event where Twitch chat controlled a Game Boy, I guess, or an emulator. And they somehow managed to beat the game in 390 hours.
Yep, and basically what they did is they took every single response from the Twitch chat and input it as a command in the Game Boy / emulator. So if someone said up, it would go up one tile. Or one selection in the battle menu.
Did you guys watch this?
No, I never caught the craze myself. I didn't want to sit around for hours watching almost nothing get done.
Oh, dude, I watched a lot of this when it first came out. I mean, some of the biggest memes to come out of it, definitely, you can still see floating around today, like all praise Helix when they went for I forget the Pokemon's name, Ammonite. Yeah, and then my favorite were definitely some of the names of the Pokemon. So I remember they had a Zapdos. And they named it was like AA something. I think it was like a J or something. And they would always call him Battery Jesus for like AA batteries. And they had a Venomoth named ATTTVVV or something. So they called all-terrain.
ATV?
So yes. Yeah, all-terrain Venomoth is what people would call him. And then there was classic, the Pidgeotto named Bird Jesus.
Didn't they accidentally release their Butterfree or something? I can't remember it at some point.
They released a couple of Pokemon towards like the very end of the game. Yeah.
I mean, I think it was a very interesting social experiment, if anything. Um, Anytime you do something on the internet, there's always these trolls. I remember there was a group of people that was basically just there to screw things up. Release Pokemon, jump off ledges, all these random things. I'm surprised. I'm legitimately surprised they got through the entire thing.
And this game didn't have the democracy versus, I forget the other mode, where essentially
Anarchy?
it would... Anarchy? Yeah. This one didn't have that, right? I think that only came into play for the second game? Maybe it was in this game.
No, they came into it, I think about the Game Center is when they got into Anarchy versus Democracy. Just so they could actually have any chance of completing the game.
Okay.
Because the floor tile puzzles in the Game Center for the Rocket Hideout were just way too difficult to ever complete if they were just taking every single command.
Yeah, I think it was a great sort of nostalgic comeback for the game in terms of bringing back some of these great memories to the players, as well as just being a fun social activity that I think easily there was 100,000 people, even back then on Twitch in the stream.
Yeah, at its height, it was hitting about 100K consistently, and it was a very unique thing for Twitch at that time, so it's not really any surprise that it was getting a lot of coverage, a lot of buzz, and of course, yeah, people just love the game, so they would go in and just spam start times 9 for hours.
And before we jump into the last thing, I just want to bring up the thing that Alex shared. The problem with Gen 1. We're talking about how Pokemon's so great, but it did have its share of issues. And when I mean share of issues, this is like an essay.
Yeah, many of the battle mechanics in the game just frankly did not work correctly, but it's kind of like, I don't know, another game I could think of is like Donkey Kong 64, where if you know anything about that game, half the walls don't exist. But when you're just playing it as a kid and you don't know, it works fine when you're actually playing within the bounds of the game, what they're intending you to do. And so yeah, you don't actually see a lot of what is actually going on in the background in Gen 1, but there are many things that are broken. One of the big things probably is that's going to affect you during any gameplay is the crit chance in Gen 1 is just absurd. It's basically based on your base speed for your Pokemon. So Pokemon like Starmie and Electrode, who have very high base speeds, will just be critting all the time. Slash will just like crit every single time on Dugtrio and Persian. And then one of my favorite things is Focus Energy, a skill that's supposed to increase your crit chance, actually divide your crit chance by 4. That's just absurd. I don't know how they managed to do that, but you'll actually be critting less if you use Focus Energy. Yeah, of course, there's a whole list. I don't want to go through it all. But there's just some mechanics that are really dumb, like how Wrap and Fire Spin were implemented, where you just literally could not do anything as long as it kept hitting you. Yeah.
And once again, kind of saying what Alex said, as a kid, you don't notice any of this. You're just like, oh man, I keep using this skill and it says it's supposed to give me more critical strike chance, but man, I'm super unlucky today.
Yep, exactly.
So I want to ask you guys, what did you name your rival in the game as a kid? I think mine was named like Poop or something.
Man, that's a strong swear word for a kid.
Hey, dude, I bring out the potty humor as a young lad.
I'm trying to remember how many characters you could actually use, but it was something to do with nuts.
I think you used 7. I think 7 was the max. Or maybe 8.
I named my trainer Big Nuts, and I named my rival Big Butts.
Oh my god. Would you rather have big nuts or big butt, though?
I think the answer is obvious based on the naming scheme I chose.
Well, I was really into the anime at that time, so I just named them Ash and Gary. So I was pretty lame. All right, and let's wrap up with one last question. So Pokemon is, one of the better selling franchises, I would say. It's second next to Mario. Mario sold 528 million copies overall. Pokemon sold roughly 300 million. And then, we have like Call of Duty, GTA, Wii, etc., etc. Numbers aside, how do you think Pokemon stacks up compared to all these other great franchises in video game history?
I don't know. I guess I feel the trend almost could be that Pokemon overtakes even Mario as like the just general video game thing that people know. Because obviously right now you can walk around and a lot of people know exactly what Pikachu is if you say a Pokemon. So I don't know. That's just my thought is I think in the future Pokemon will overtake Mario as the iconic video game character.
I agree with Alex. It sounds weird to say now, but I think Pokemon, in terms of recognizability and pop culture, is bigger than Mario at this point. I feel like Mario has a unique characteristic of being sort of just it's an actual person. While Alex did bring up Pikachu, there's still like Pokemon as a genre is a lot bigger than just Pikachu himself or other
right. Yeah, but everyone recognizes Pikachu instantly.
Just pop culture wise, Pokemon has surpassed any other video game, and you can just look at it from. I was in the mall today, and guess what I see in the middle of one of the hallways? Pokemon Center vending machine, like just in the middle of the mall. And then there are Pokemon centers, Pokemon plushies, Pokemon amusement park like themed rides and things like that. So,
yeah, I think where Mario went wrong was their movie and the Super Mario show. I think that's
Is that what it's based on? Pokemon's TV show was successful and Mario's wasn't.
I mean, to be honest, the anime was pretty successful here, right?
It still is. I heard Sun and Moon's pretty good, actually.
It's really good. I watched it. I used to watch it when the new episodes came out right before I went to sleep. They always have annual movies too, right?
Just about, yeah.
Oh my goodness. Sidetrack. How many of you guys watched Pokemon 2000, the movie?
Oh my god, that's my favorite movie.
I almost like cried when they went to the lab and there were like the mutated Pokemon or like the experiment. I was like, no, you can't do this to the Pokemon. Let them be free.
Wait, that's the first movie, not 2000.
Oh, sorry, Pokemon the movie. I think it was just what it was called.
Yeah, it was called Pokemon the first movie.
I like Pokemon the first movie. I'm sorry, Tristan.
No, I like Pokemon 2000. I like Lugia.
Pokemon 2000 was perfect because it had that Slow King who would just talk. I don't know why he could talk, but
I think we need to decide which is a better movie, Pokemon the first movie or Pokemon 2000.
Okay, I'll put out a poll, Pokemon the first movie versus Pokemon the movie 2000. Let's finish off with this. Who's your favorite Pokemon? Of the OG.
Okay, we're limiting Gen 1, okay.
My favorite Pokemon is Snorlax.
Alright, mine was probably Kabutops.
Damn.
So I'm just attracted to the sights, and he was all rocky and super edgy looking, so I guess they were right. They marketed it to me perfectly.
To me, I think it's Jolteon.
Okay, yeah, I was thinking an Eevee at first. I wanted to say an Eevee, but I thought a little deeper.
Jolteon's like the second grade Pikachu, I feel. Alright. And I think that wraps it up for episode 9 of TRC Podcasts. Thanks for tuning in. You can find TRC Podcast on Podbean, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and all your favorite podcast directories. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to subscribe, review, share it with your friends, smash that like button, send us some fan mail. It really helps us out. We're also on social media as Viewport Gaming. on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You might be asking, why Viewport Gaming, Tristan? Well, TRC Podcast is part of Viewport Gaming, a gaming site that provides a look into video games through reviews, features, and podcasts. You can find all Viewport content at viewportgaming.com. I'm definitely going to tweet out that poll on which Pokemon movie is better. I'm hoping Pokemon Twitter is going to make the right choice of pick.
Hey, no biasing the votes, mister.
Pick the correct movie.
Yep, you know what to do.
You know what to do. Wink, wink.
Stop. Don't do this.
As always, I've been your host, Tristan Jung, joined by Albert Corsten.
Boba.
And Alex Nestor.
Until next time.